Greetings, I'm Sophis, and this is less of an objective review and more of an anecdotal commentary on Kenshi. Please take note of the timestamps and browse at your leisure. Your time is precious, and I am not here to waste it. This is why I played Kenshi. Kenshi is a game that caught me by surprise at first. While it can at times seem unforgiving and dangerous, and even downright sadistic, after many hours of playing and enjoying the game, I actually find it calming and relaxing. It throws you into an indifferent world where you can be anyone or a group of anyones. It does not hold your hand, point you where to go, nor does it care what you do. You are ultimately the one who decides what your end goal is. You could be a lone warrior, a smuggler, have your own clan of ninja, or even play at conquest by amassing an elite army. Ultimately, you will be the one deciding where your story goes as you interact with the world. In my experience, the narrative comes naturally as you play and deal with the situations thrown your way. Kenshi's gameplay is relatively simple to understand, but it has plenty of nuance to it. First, and most notably, its health system is limb-based and you have an amount of blood. Bleed out and you're dead. Lose all your health in your head, chest, or stomach and you're dead. Empty out your hunger bar and you're dead. Everything else depends how quick you were to close a wound, or if you were lucky enough to be near someone who will heal you when you're unable to do so. Most of the times, if you aren't out of your depth, you will get knocked out. Much can still happen during that time, but your odds are far better. Live to fight another day, even if someone stole your things or captured you. Second, you have the skill and attribute system. It is fairly in-depth, and in the majority of the cases in Kenshi, you start off with most of it nearly at zero. You and all NPCs in Kenshi work off of this system, and there are a lot of hostiles who are far better than you in all aspects here. Perhaps the most notorious thing in this system is the toughness attribute. Key to becoming a hardened warrior able to take on the greatest foes, but only raised by you getting hit and beat up for the most part. Don't let all these numbers scare you, however. It's simple enough to train any of these. Simply do an activity that involves said attribute or skill. No complications, no tricks. Third and last, I will speak of the armor and weapon system. This is by far the more complicated of the three things I've spoken about. While you can be someone who aims for fashion in Kenshi, what you wear does matter quite a lot. Different armor covers different body parts, which protects or fails to protect you from attack. It also affects your skills, both positively and negatively, depending on what you choose. Don't expect to be very stealthy or nimble while you're wearing a heavy suit of armor, but you can count on being well protected. Weapons are a whole other beast. There are many types, qualities, and each have their pros and cons. I wouldn't dream of giving you a proper guide on them. I have seen a lot of heated discussions on which weapons are best, and although there are many that are often listed as the best, my advice is to try them out yourself and get a feel for it. In general, however, blunt is good against armored, pole arms are good against animals, and cutting weapons are good against lightly armored or unarmored foes. There are other mechanics, such as the outpost system, which I won't cover in this video. However, I will briefly mention it. You can establish an outpost most anywhere in Kenshi, so long as you're ready to deal with the locals and the attention it attracts. There are subtler places and even a few bits of the map where you can entirely avoid getting raided, or Have the environment itself deal with your problem. Perhaps in the future I may make a video speaking of it, but there are a lot of good guides for it already out. Personally, I enjoy finding a spot that suits each particular run I'm doing. I'll tell you now very briefly of my initial experience with Kenshi. I started with the impression that this game was very difficult and scary because of all I've mentioned so far. I followed a few newbie guides and I did the safest approach. Stay near a city, mine ores, buy food, buy a place to stay, build a research bench, do the initial research, and get some storage for all the ore that you're mining. I spent several in-game days on this loop, and I fell into a dangerous trap. I kept recruiting characters to my group, more mouths to feed, all bunkered up in the middle of a city, weak, pathetic, and dependent on the availability of food at the bar, and on one of them mining an ore deposit day in and day out. I even caved to bandit demands, worried of being outnumbered when I was caught out in the open. In short, I was afraid to take risks. Only when I started taking them that the game did get more interesting to me. One of my characters, the one that I started the run with, explored the world, and although incapable in combat, she had the skills to avoid trouble. I trained stealth and had a ninja in my hands. With her, I learned about smuggling and started to run a few routes to earn more cash than I did just by mining away the ores with the characters back home. The city I was in started feeling small after some time, so I found a new place with more houses to buy, more space to store things, as well as being closer to where I wanted to make a base. The problem, however, is that all my characters were horribly trained, and only 2 could travel in relative safety. The several times I tried to do the migration, my cozy, city-grown weaklings died a predictable death. It made me realize just how much I had missed out by keeping them out of danger. Many reloads later, with some knowledge and luck, they made it to the new town. And from there, I started growing their group and training them, until I grew the courage to settle somewhere all my own. This wasn't a glorious run by any means, or even particularly interesting, but I felt I had learned a lesson, and it motivated me to take risks and try other approaches. Now, onto the matter of mods and exploits. I'll speak of those together because there are always discussions of the purity of an experience when it comes to a game. To some, any mod is already a cheat in and of itself. To others, there are all sorts of lines and limits they establish. I am not here to say which one is right or wrong, only on what I personally enjoy and what I think on the matter. This is a single-player game. To me, this means that whatever you choose to do, you are not affecting in any harmful way the experience of others, so you should be free to decide for yourself where the line is drawn. A friend of mine once told me, in a single-player game, the only one you can cheat is yourself. Obviously, there are mods and exploits that completely trivialize some, if not all, aspects of the game. It can cause your enjoyment of it to be short-lived, as most mechanics are rendered pointless and all challenges are reduced to nothing. Even then, if that's your thing, don't let me or anyone stop you. To me, the line is fairly blurry, and I lean towards the convenience and narrative benefits of a mod. As for exploits, I tend to prefer making use of them if they'll facilitate a task, but avoid being over-reliant on them if it will ultimately trivialize the run. I also prefer those that take setup to do, as going out of the way to set them up feels like a payoff similar to if I had done things the traditional way. A good example of a mod that can be argued over is the popular Recruit Prisoners mod. Vanilla Kenshi does not allow you to recruit anything other than a few characters at a bar and some others in special occasions. This mod, however, permits you to hire just about anyone into your team. Could you use this to beeline straight to the most dangerous parts of the map, capture foes there, and cause a cascading effect of hiring more and more of them until you have a well-trained army for very little effort? Yes. But could you also use it to give yourself more story options, capturing a foe who almost beat you in a tough fight, or as part of some story where you raided an enemy outpost, managed to get one of them to come around to your side, and didn't particularly care which skills or attributes they have? Yes. In short, only you really decide how exploitative you want to be with this. To me, the mods are simply tools, and it's up to you how to use them. It is with that mindset that I will then present to you a recommended first run. Note that my Kenshi is modded, but for the most part it doesn't impact the core gameplay in a way that is too distant from vanilla. I will point out differences where relevant, and I will also include the list of mods I run in the description below. Most of it were small additions that piled on over time, or specific mods that I got for the sake of a particular run. Now onto the gameplay section of this video. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to start a new game and choose the Wanderer Start. I realize there are other options that might be preferred by veteran players, but this is simple enough, and as you can see, I am not tweaking any of the advanced options, although I encourage you to do so later on. So, without further ado, let's just begin. And so here we are at the border zone with a typical Greenlander, nothing too special about him. And we'll start with the safe task of mining some ores. But worry not, we will not be sticking too long with this. It will just be for starters to get some cash and secure some food, but soon enough we will be going out of our shell and taking some risks. And for now, I am simply going to wait for the ore to fill up and just skip time ahead as much as needed whilst keeping an eye out on my surroundings, because sometimes roaming groups of bandits can show up and either try to rob you or attack you, and while this is an early danger, it is also an early opportunity, which would mean lots of equipment and loot that will speed up this initial part quite a bit. But unfortunately, at the very start, no one shows up, so I simply keep mining until I have enough. I fill up my inventory and briefly forget that shift clicking exists. So then I can just sell off this ore at the bar and get the food, as I mentioned before. As you can see, with this small amount of ore, you are already encumbered, and that is due to your poor stats at the start. But on the upside, you are training a little bit of strength by doing this little jog. However, this is far from the most optimal, and soon enough we will be trying something a little better than just this. So I get a few loaves of bread and some meat, and that is about it for now. Afterwards, after exiting the bar, I simply decide that it would be too tedious to go on mining and take the risk of doing a little bit of exploring with this fragile character in search of one of the roaming bands, since it shouldn't be all that hard to find something here. Even though the area we're in, the hub, being quite a safe haven, there are groups of dangerous bandits all around. And it doesn't take very long, and I find a few roaming dust bandits. If they are passive, I will provoke them and attack them, but as you can see here, they're already trying to start something. So, taking the risk, I simply run, and I will just go ahead and kite them all the way to the hub. It's important to note that since my Kenshi is modded, I will be taking them to a slightly more full hub than you might get in your vanilla playthrough. And this will mean that there are more able hands to fight all these enemies. Be careful in your own saves just to make sure that you don't deplete the amount of people who can fight in a city by constantly farming enemy groups. Or otherwise, the next time you run to the bar, you just might be out of luck. In the middle of all the fighting, I go ahead and try to find someone who's a little busy fighting other enemies to try and sneak a little bit of combat experience in. It's pretty much how you will train combat at the very start of Kenshi in a way that doesn't potentially end your run. The other option being having a large group of inexperienced fighters fight equally weak foes. However, this is a little riskier and you will have a lot more people to feed, so it's of course safer to stick with cities and fight larger groups with guards nearby. This is slightly tedious, of course, because the stats don't go up quite as high, but with time and patience, like most things in Kenshi, it does have its payoff. And so for this part, I will mostly be looting all these enemies and selling off all their stuff. This will be our primary source of income, since mining ores takes up a lot more time and isn't quite as interesting. Your mileage may vary, of course, in your first playthrough, depending on what you find, and perhaps you will find more groups than I did in this playthrough. While I was still finishing off looting the initial group of dust bandits, a group of starving bandits attacked the hub and was taken down. I also proceeded to loot them and try to get a little bit of experience in, but the most important thing is that they had a very good early game item for your character. These wooden sandals are pretty much the most important bit of equipment that you can have early on, and I'll soon show you why that is the case. After selling everything off, I stick with a very simple set of equipment, and mostly light armor, pretty much just a heart protector and the wooden sandals, as well as an adachi for defense. My character will not be good with this weapon or any other weapon, but at least it's something that you can block with. And while I'm making my way to the next city, you can see why awareness of the environment is important. And you can see why I was traveling light, as this group that suddenly ambushed me matches my speed. So I quickly ditch all the excess items in my inventory, and soon enough, you can see that I am outrunning them thanks to the minor boost that the wooden sandals give to my speed. You will find that this is a key tool for survival in Kenshi. Speed is king, and with enough investment you will outrun most enemies, and with a few extra tricks, you just might outrun all enemies, although that is a little more difficult to pull off. If you are a Kenshi veteran, you will know what I am talking about. And so I make my way to Squin, and I just briefly stop when I notice that there is a small fight going on behind me. I pause and take a look as far as the camera can let me see it, just to see if it's something I can swoop in and loot. However, both groups fighting are hostile, and even if I show up to steal the things from the losers, the winners will still be around and try to fight me, so I continue on my way. Besides, our visit to Squin isn't particularly long, so I will mostly be in and out. As you can see, I try to sneak just a little bit of fighting, but the guards are faster than me, so I simply go back to doing what I came to do here in Squin. We are here for one thing and one thing only, a shop on the other side of town which sells bags. That is important in the early game because, as you can see, our inventory space is rather limited, and if we are going to make our initial fortune out of looting enemies, it's best that we have more space to carry all their valuables. With our business in Squin concluded, I simply go back to the hub and I go mine just to pass the time, because it's slightly better than just speeding up time and waiting for a roaming group to show up. Quickly enough, I see a small scuffle inside the hub, and I go in to just steal some valuables off of the downed bandits. But it's just a minor little fight, and I go back to mining. It doesn't take long for a roaming band of starving bandits to show up, larger than the little one I had just looted, and so I lure them all the way to the hub to have them dealt with. Once again, I try to sneak in a little bit of combat experience, but it's pretty much minor. The point here is to mostly be in combat and try to maximize what little benefits you can gain from such low-level fighting. Once the guards dispatch them, I go about looting them, but this time I also go ahead and start training first aid on them, since I accumulated enough of the bandages to be able to do so. It is a good practice that will help you quickly level up your first aid if you also patch up your enemies. And while I am patching up the enemies, I quickly find a very suitable candidate for our training, a starving bandit with leg wounds. I cure this starving bandit just enough to avoid bleeding out and losing all the health on the other limbs, but I keep the leg untreated. Later on you will see why I did that. But this was a very fortuitous occasion which will help us train quite a bit. I fill up the inventory of our character with the loot from the starving bandits, and I start carrying our wounded friend in his shoulder. Now, what we will do is simply do a little bit of jogging. As you might remember from the start, the encumbrance made us run slower, but also trained our strength. In Kenshi, the best way to train your strength is to be over-encumbered and to be carrying someone. So we will do just that. We will be carrying our friend with us for quite a while, and you will see how important it is for the training. This part is mostly more of the same. You simply go back and forth on the hub using its safety to avoid being ambushed by enemies, and simply passing the time running along the walls, earning more strength experience. Basically, you can do this by pausing the game and clicking shift back and forth on two different corners of the city, and this will queue up the move orders, and your character will move back and forth until the move orders are all done. Then you can simply speed up the game and watch. This will be a more boring part of the training, but nonetheless important, because you can quickly get to values like 30 or even 50 strength with this training. The more time you dedicate to this, the better off you are. In this next part, I will make use of a little bit of exploiting. As I've said before, I do this when I find that there is a setup and it facilitates a task. You don't have to do this, but I find that the way to train thievery in Kenshi is otherwise too time-consuming and dull. The way that you train thievery quickly in Kenshi is by having a downed opponent and one who is willing to play dead. They usually do that when they find that their surroundings are far too dangerous for them to get up and simply leave. And this is the case for a friend here. So whilst they are playing dead, you click on them whilst in stealth mode and you try to steal something from them. Even if it fails, it helps along level your thievery very quickly at the start, then it's a little bit slower as time goes on, but it is still far faster than any other alternative. Be mindful that the one that you're doing this on is not unconscious, otherwise you are simply clicking and getting no experience out of it. And so I do this time and time again just to get a little bit of quick leveling. One thing to be mindful is that in the hub there are a group of people who will capture downed characters, yourself included. These boys in blue will tie you up and take you somewhere else to be sold. One of them tries to get our bandit friend. I quickly pause and try to get them back by slinging them over the shoulder, and this avoids their capture. Going back to the grind, I run back and forth with our character on the walls just to get more strength experience until I notice that our friend is close to being even more useful to us. They are at a point where one limb will be lost and they will be without one of their legs, which means they can no longer stand up. A downed enemy is very useful in Kenshi. And so, as soon as the bandit loses the leg, I patch them up, throw them over the shoulder, and go back to a little bit of training. I wait for these unsavory folk to go away, and I find a better spot to set down our downed friend. Now that they mostly crawl on the ground, I can train another skill, because if they try to run away, while I am sneaking, I can try for assassination, and they will be too slow to stop me. By doing this time and again, you can level up your assassination skill rather quickly, same as the thievery. When I am satisfied enough with our strength training, I simply stop and quickly go back to mining, just to make a little more money, because I am trying to get 10,000 cats at the very least, and a little extra change just so we have money for food and other supplies. Veterans of Kenshi will know exactly why precisely 10,000 cats, which is the currency. And these 10,000 cats buy you the best perk in all of Kenshi. It is by far the most worthwhile investment that you can make. A membership with the Shinobi Thieves. The benefits at first don't seem like a lot. You get access to a tower
where you can train assassination and a few other skills with dummies up to, I think, level 30 if I'm not mistaken, and it takes a very long time. You also get a place to lay down and recover your wounds, but that's also not very important. The more important thing is the guild trader. It is a fence that will buy stolen goods, although at a big discount. But this also means that their goods are cheaper than other merchants, and they do sell exclusive shinobi gear. Now that I have access to their tower, I simply upgrade my character's equipment just a bit, not too much, just the basics to help with a little bit of stealth, and I trade my weapon of choice to a ninja sword, which I understand is not a very good weapon, but I find it a very decent sidearm for blocking. And since we haven't trained much in combat, this is mostly what I will be using it for. This concludes the hub part of our journey, and now it is time to move on northwards. We go to the city of Stack, which is our first entrance into the Holy Nation territories. One thing to be mindful is that Kenshi is a reactive world with certain rules that you find out, and oftentimes the hard way. The Holy Nation is a very bigoted society, and they only prefer males. In fact, Greenlander males are most preferred, whilst women are shunned. And one thing you should carry on your person is one of their holy books, just in case. But since I am playing a male Greenlander, the chance of me being stopped by a group of inquisitors is harder to happen than if I was playing a female. It's also worth noting that the other options, such as skeletons and hivers, will get attacked on sight as they are considered monstrosities. Same for the Shek. And if your character has any sort of mechanical limbs, also expect to be attacked. These people believe in purity, even if it means you crawling on the ground in their territory. But, as I said, since I am playing a male Greenlander, it's not too much of a hassle to travel in their territory. I go all the way up to Blister Hill, since in Stack I didn't find what I was actually looking for, a bedroll, and unfortunately, just the same, I don't find it here either. Which is unfortunate since it is a very good bit of equipment to have early on, since after you get beat up during a fight, it's easy to find a spot to hide in, pop that down, and recover your wounds. Now we are going up the mountain and making a little detour from our next major destination. This next part is a little bit of a tricky area which, depending on your playthrough, many things can happen. If things are in our favor, we will have the best place in Kenshi to train stealth. If it doesn't quite load right, we will still have a lot of loot to gather and sell. As I arrive in this location, I see that it didn't load in quite properly, so I quick save and reload. Kenshi can be a bit buggy at times, but you get used to it. Upon reloading, I see that we actually had the best scenario happen. As you can see, this place is crawling with blood spiders. And the thing about training stealth in Kenshi is, the more hostiles that you have nearby as you are crouched down, the more you level up your stealth. So with this many blood spiders running around, by running just a little above them over the cliff, you get a lot of stealth experience and fast. I simply train this as I've trained the strength back in the hub, and I only stop when I see a group of skeletons roaming into these ruins. These skeletons are doomed to lose the fight, even though they are very decent fighters, and they are the perfect example of why you simply just don't get yourself swarmed by enemies, even though they may seem weak. With them downed, I take into consideration that we are under the cover of night, and I risk going down to loot them. These skeletons, after all, are a little better equipped than the people at the hub and have better weapons, which sell for more. And if you are considering looting enemies to make a fortune, consider this: it's more worthwhile to steal their weapons and ditch their equipment. Another valuable thing that the skeletons have is their repair kits. I try to help one of them, but quickly I see that a blood spider is coming this way, so I run. I go back to training stealth until another group wanders in, gets their butt kicked, and even though it's daylight, I run the risk just to get a little more loot. And I keep training stealth until I get satisfied with the level Jurgen is currently at. As you can see, the stealth animation changes at some point during the training as you start doing the famous Naruto run when you get to a high enough level. With stealth trained, I finish this little detour and go to our next major destination, a place in these mountains called World's End, a very useful town to visit. If you are making outposts, it is a place that has valuable research books that you can use to research higher technologies, but we are not going into that today. What we are dealing with are the merchants here. They carry decent mid-level equipment, which is a good way to start your journey. In some cases, I mostly case the joint and see what the merchants have to offer, but in other cases, I make a few purchases here and there to start equipping our character. Most notably, I get a pair of pants and a hat, as well as a shirt to give some light protection. We are not going for a heavily armored character after all. We are going for a scout type character meant to only fight small engagements and then leave. Another thing you see me do in this town is train up lockpicking, another important skill for the stealthy type, and also important for the non-stealthy types to be able to loot some locations in Kenshi which have very valuable loot. With most of our stuff sold and purchasing done, I wait for nightfall so I can burgle one of the stores. Since our lockpicking is low, it takes quite a while to breach their door. But once I am in, I get what I can take, especially the blueprints, which are lighter and more valuable, and I make off with that. There is an exploit which I will not support in this first playthrough that you could do that allows you to sell back all these stolen goods to these very merchants. But I will not teach you that and not try to ruin your first run. Instead, I will do the quote-unquote honest thing and go to one of the Shinobi Thieves' towers to sell off this excess loot. With our business in World's End concluded, I leave town to do just that. Right now we are going into the desert to get to one of their towers. We cross the first city and there isn't much to be said other than an overzealous guard that follows me into the desert just to ask to check my bags even though I am out of town. On the way to Shobatai, where the nearest tower is, I see a skirmish going on, and feeling a little confident, I even try to sneak in a little bit of combat training. However, I get quickly told off, and I disengage as fast as I can, resuming our journey. In Shobatai, I sell off the excess things from World's End and get a little bit more of equipment, as well as go up to the tower to recover for a bit from the unsavory little detour that I took and took damage in. Pay attention to limb damage on the legs if you are going to play this sort of scout character, since your stealth and your speed will be affected by leg wounds. Thus why I purchased those masterwork pants back in World's End. The better leg protection, the better the scout. And with that, I set off from Shobatai, off to our final stop for this little playthrough. It doesn't take very long, and we arrive at the Great Desert at a little outpost out in the middle of nowhere. This is one of my favorite locations in Kenshi, and one of the other start positions that you can have in the menu. However, if you choose to start here, not only you have a larger group to deal with, you also don't have the accumulated bit of skills and equipment that I have by starting as a wanderer. This is the point where I leave you off, because I think that with this you have a somewhat decent starting character with good carry capacity, mobility, and stealth, but who still has a long way to go to learn their skills, and who can still either go solo or start a group story. The way this story ends is up to you.